Hi everyone, I'm Sophia, a student champion, and for World Mental Health Day today, we're going to be discussing climate anxiety with Dr. Dan O'Hare, an educational psychologist and senior lecturer here at the University of Bristol. So Dan, could you start off by telling us what climate anxiety is?
Thanks, Sophia. Climate anxiety, that's a really interesting phrase, and it's not sort of as simple as it sounds to define. So firstly, it's kind of a reaction to the things that we're seeing around the world. So that might be biodiversity loss, ecological destruction, the climate crisis. So that understandably creates perhaps feelings of worry or stress in people. But it also can kind of refer to a whole other range of emotions as well. So yes, we might feel worried about what we're seeing, but we might also feel angry about what we're seeing. We might feel angry about perhaps governments take lack of action, but we also might feel things like guilt or shame. So the idea that we're not doing enough individually. I think what's really important though is to kind of see that terms like climate anxiety kind of imply that, you know, if you're worried about the climate, then you have an issue. It might be a mental health issue, climate anxiety, and you have to deal with it. But what I think is really important to communicate is that there's a kind of a view in psychology that isn't the case, that actually it's not you that needs to change that has, you know, the person that might be experiencing climate anxiety. It's us collectively as a species, as humanity, sort of taking more action that needs to change. Does that make sense, like that sort of dynamic?
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, it's a collective thing. So what are some ways people could get involved and be able to almost cope with these fears they may have?
So I think climate anxiety is associated with sort of taking action and maybe pro-environmental action. So if you're worried about something, particularly the climate, you might try to change your lifestyle or do things to kind of contribute to a better climate. One of the things you said about was collectively, yeah. So we're all part of groups. We might be part of our local community, our university community. We're sort of thinking, you know, we're part of a nation here. So you might take action at different levels. I'm aware, though, that phrase, taking action, can seem overwhelming. Sort of take action how? With what? So I think it's important for us to be specific. Maybe there's a particular part of a campaign that you're really interested in. Maybe it's about diet, or it's about local transport, or it's about heating in homes. So I think being specific and being involved in sort of areas or campaigns that you're really passionate about specifically can help. And that might sort of avoid feeling overwhelmed. You know, if you kind of have to take action, well, at least now I have a focus. Having said that, though, there can be an over-focus on taking action at an individual level, and obviously the climate crisis won't be solved individually. So yes, if you're taking action, great, but also self-care is really important too. So giving yourself permission to have some downtime, to maybe move away from looking at sort of environmental media or social media, because it can be, you know, it can be pretty distressing. So giving yourself that time is really important too, because it allows you to stay energized and motivated.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned sometimes individuals might feel overwhelmed. So what could they do perhaps instead within a group to maybe reduce those kind of overwhelming fears but still feel like they're taking action?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think firstly, when we're with groups of people that we connect with and we know share similar values and similar experiences, ultimately I think what we feel is validated. So having that validation from other people and realizing that this is a really normal reaction to what really is quite distressing circumstances is really key. So being involved in groups, so at Bristol here, that might be the Sustainability Network, it might be being involved in the Be the Change campaign, but you can move out of sort of those smaller communities like the University of Bristol, and you might think about, well, what could I do at a larger level? That might be having conversations with local councillors or local MPs, writing to your local MP. It might be participating in marches or protests. All of these things are really valid and active ways to sort of take action collectively. But as I say, self-care, going back to that last point, is really key as well. And sometimes those groups of people that you might be with, you can sort of focus on self-care together, and that's a really positive way that you might sort of move forward with managing and sort of reacting and responding to those feelings of anxiety or stress or anger.
Great. And so we've discussed this now on a group level, and you've mentioned how important self-care is. So what are some really key ways people can look after themselves and kind of participate in this self-care individually?
Yeah, I mean, it might not sound revolutionary, but sort of some of the basics are really key. So sleep, exercise, diet, they're really key as well, as it might be across any sort of area of life. I'm aware, sort of certainly my own experiences of perhaps worrying about what's happening in terms of the planet or climate, that it can kind of become all consuming. And so actually making sure that you're coming off, as I say, those perhaps social media channels or media channels that are reporting on environmental sort of destruction or ecological destruction, come away from those, making sure you're getting enough sleep. Exercise is really important. Being out in the natural world is really important as well. So local parks, local walks, that's key. That gives you some downtime and also connects you with nature, which is really important too. And of course, diet as well. You know, that might be associated with the individual changes you make, but making sure you're eating, sleeping, and exercising well is really key. And also connecting, as I say, with those people that you share those values, and being able to have some downtime with them and with friends and family.
That's great, and it's really good to know a lot of those things as well you can do for free. Some people might feel powerless because they don't have the kind of money, but even just going to the park, obviously that doesn't cost anything. So I guess to finish, maybe we could have 3 key things that people could do and take away from this.
So I think the first thing is perhaps you could talk to others. So often there's a sense that we might need to convince others that there's a problem. We might look around and think no one's taking action. So one way that we could perhaps feel fulfilled is to have conversations with other people. What I don't mean by that is trying to sort of badger them into sort of seeing your way of things, but talking about the climate, talking about the natural world and what's happening can be really effective in itself, talking to friends and family. The second is to maybe take specific action, so in an area that you're really interested in. And obviously the third is then to give yourself permission to move away from some of the action or some of the perhaps distressing environments or situations you find yourself in, just to really look after yourself so that you're able to then come back more motivated and with more energy to carry on pursuing that passion and fulfilling those values that you have about empathy and compassion towards the planet and towards the environment.
That's been really useful and informative. Thank you, Dan.